Hi, my name is Petra, and I'm an astrologer, and I am going to record a webinar about this year that we're moving into, this really, really big year. There's a lot of transits, there's a lot of change, and I've put together a slideshow that I'm going to share with you. Here we are. So let's back up a little bit. This is the year of the Firehorse. We're not quite there yet. We will be. We will be soon. We're actually wrapping up a year. We're wrapping up the year of the snake. So, there's been a lot of talk about this. I'm sure this isn't the first time you've heard it, but to just kind of recapitulate where we find ourselves. So, the way that Chinese astrology works is that the elements move in years, sets of two, 5 sets of two. So, every 10 years, we're returning to a 0 year, 0, 1, 10, and the animals are 12s. And so a 9 year and then a renewal 1 year, they're not always the same animals. It takes quite a while. So where we are is we're wrapping up a 9 year with a snake, which is by all accounts, pretty dramatic death rebirth year. So we're in the process of shedding a skin, which is always dramatic. If you ever have had reptiles up close as pets or anything, then you know that when a snake, for example, is going to shed a skin, it gets all tight and weird and its eyes get opaque. And then it thrashes around so much. And then eventually it starts to get out of that old skin. It's right about where we are. And on the other side of it, it looks amazing. But the process looks very dramatic. You're like, oh my God, is that snake okay? Which is probably a question that, the aliens are asking about humanity right now because we are thrashing around quite a bit as well. And sorry, I have a cold. The preparation for the Firehorse year, and it's not just the Firehorse year, it's going to be Firehorse and it's going to be Fire Goat 2 years back to back, because again, the elements move in twos. So we're going to come galloping straight out of the gates after Chinese New Year, which is on the 17th. And then, there's a lot of other things too that we're going to talk about. Let's see. This is me, just to let you know. I do consultations, classes, weeklies. I run an ongoing mentorship and have a radio show. Let's talk about this year. So we entered through the gateway, the Gregorian calendar turnover is a bit lackluster because it's not really when we start the new year. We all know that. But we have been subscribing to this Gregorian calendar for long enough that it's a moment for sure. Flipping over the numerical year, even if it's just a fiscal year, it's still, there's a container around it. But it's not the time to be doing anything besides resting and restoring and making sure that you are taking care of yourself in the cold, dark time in the northern hemisphere, of course. That's where I am. So that's where the point of view that I am talking about this from. Astrology still works just fine for the southern hemisphere. The signs are the same, but the tropical western is pinned to the seasons, and so the seasons are opposite. So we stepped through the doorway with a Gemini moon. And it was actually the moon on the West Coast spent the day in late Taurus and then crossed into Gemini, pretty close to midnight. And that's the same journey that Uranus is going to make a little bit later this year. So it felt like it was kind of paving the way for us to open the doors, wrapping up, closing down 7 years of Uranus in Earth and preparing for Uranus in air. And we have Pluto and Aquarius, which we're going to talk about, but there's a trine between Uranus and Taurus and Pluto and Aquarius. So we know that there's a teamwork, a team effort that's going to be happening that we did touch on a little bit last year, but we went back through the retrograde, we went back to the old setting. I'm really sorry about the cough, which is where we find ourselves now at about 27 or so Taurus. And so, yeah, the moon paved the way, and which feels appropriate because we now find ourselves in the age of air. And this is something that I feel like is really important for us to contextualize where we find ourselves entering 2026. So, The ages move in 200-year cycles. And we just wrapped up a 200-year cycle, which was the age of Earth. And that concluded on December 20th, winter solstice of 2020. So as we began, what feels like the beginning of a new era, the hallmark of Saturn and Pluto coming together in late Capricorn is what initiated what we could just give the umbrella title of the COVID era. But the other thing that really dramatically changed that year was this triplicity shift. And so we've been referencing the Great Conjunction is the name for the conjunction that happens very consistently every 20 years between Jupiter and Saturn. So we have the great expansive gas giant Jupiter, and we have the very small, cold, faraway, dense, constricting gas giant that is Saturn. And they come together and they determine what is the next phase for the culture. What are we going to do? What are we doing next? So for 200 years, these two planets met every 20 years almost exclusively in Earth, and Earth is really predictable. So whether or not you liked the last 200 years, you did more or less know what to expect. And that includes, everything, including, the style of warfare. This is a year where war is a big theme. We're going to talk a lot about Aries and martial things in war. And the nature of war in the Age of Air is very different than it has been in the Age of Earth. So it's the inconsistency that we're needing to get the hang of. There's a great quote by William Gibson that says, "The future is here. It's just not evenly distributed." And that's pretty applicable to the Age of Air. So, and the Age of Air really ties in with Pluto and Aquarius, which is, Pluto's the heavy. He's the deepest base beat that we're all responding to. Wherever Pluto is it determines the main lessons of the generation that are born under the signature, and it's absolutely the signature that everybody is working while we're in it. So we got in the vehicle and shut the doors for good last November of, well, 2 years ago now, November of 2024, after a couple years of back and forth, the end of Capricorn, beginning of Aquarius. Now we're completely in. And this also, with the great conjunction that I just referred to that kicked off the Age of Air, that was in Aquarius too. That was Saturn and Jupiter in Aquarius. So that's three really significant things in Aquarius right at the beginning of this new era that is also a fourth turning, which is a phrase I'm not going to unpack at the moment, but you can look it up and I'll try and remember to talk about it a little bit later on. So things are different. We're needing to get used to this new age. When we were all born, whatever year we were born, this was all going to start happening. This big gyration into what feels to me like the age of frequency. If you look at the Aquarius glyph, it's these, everybody talks about it like it's waves. Pluto's the water bearer, and this is true. But originally, those were frequency lines. And the electrical frequency is really kind of at the root of Aquarius in many ways. It's a very complex symbol, signature, archetype. And we're going to live very deeply through all versions of it until 2024. Pluto is going to spend 20 years in this particular signature. And it sure coincided with the advent of AI in culture, the way that it's so dominant right now. It went from whispers, concerns, this, that, and the other. I'm sure if you're in the tech industry, it was more than that. But for just the general populace, it's been this thing, this futuristic thing. And now suddenly, you can't call anybody without being asked if you want to use their AI version. No, thank you. Don't want to use it at all. Would very much prefer to return to analog. And yet, here we are, at the base of a very tall mountain that we will all climb together. And Pluto's job is to refine an archetype, to refine a sign. So we're going to experience the best and the worst of Aquarius before we get to the other side. But what we will be left with is the pure version. And Aquarius is related to humankind, so it's the age of human in many ways. And it's definitely tied to the Atlantean era, which seems to have, pretty significant mythological, historical place that it lives inside of our minds and our society and our culture. And I think it's a cyclical thing that we go through. I don't think it was a one-time thing. And I think that we're at that cycle again. We're building and technology, it's in everything. And then the big question is the polarity point of Aquarius is Leo. Did we build enough heart and soul into the tech? And if we didn't, it's going to collapse again because this is the cycle. We're here to learn. This is soul school. We're humans. That's what we're doing here. And if we didn't learn the first time, we're gonna do it again. We're gonna do it again because what is time? Beyond our perceived agreement to the Saturnian passage of past, present, and future, there is no time. Everything's happening concurrently. We weren't born into the generation that heals our bloodline just to hand our intuition back over to Chat GPT. It's on us. It's on our watch that this is happening. And it's very tempting to use AI. And I don't think it's completely, evil, but I do think I've seen a number of studies already showing how quickly our gray matter shrinks in response to, I'll just ask ChatGPT, I'll just ask Grok, I'll just ask Gemini, whatever it is. I definitely, when I was traveling in Europe this summer, I was very grateful for the ability of ChatGPT to be able to do some quick calculations around how much time I had before I would miss my international flight based on the trains that were having delays. So there's a time and a place. But if you're asking it to do all your stuff and you're not thinking anymore, there's going to be a very heavy price to pay. So for what it's worth, I think we need to be really careful about what happens next. So I'm going to go through the months and just kind of highlight what's going on. So January, even though the United States just kidnapped the president of Venezuela a few days ago, this is technically the season of the long exhale. This would be, we're in Aquarius season. But beyond that, what's happening, the main thing that's happening is that we are wrapping up these very, very long cycles of Neptune and of Saturn. So Neptune is dreams and religion, spirituality and drugs and escapism and Hollywood and glamour. And it's actually ultimately everything. That's the thing about Neptune. It's hard to even talk about Neptune because it's the everything. And Neptune in Pisces is the great dissolve. Everything right now is passing through the 29th degree of the end of the entire zodiac. 29 Pisces it's not just the end of one of the signs. It's if we're looking at the 360 degrees, this is the final degree that everything, if Neptune is everything and 29 is everything, everything is moving through everything. It's again hard to talk about Neptune. But Saturn is also doing this, and Saturn's easier to talk about because Saturn represents limits and responsibility and structure and discipline and hard work. And Neptune is wrapping up a cycle it started in around 1860, and Saturn is wrapping up a cycle that it started in 1996. And so these two planets of dreams and reality, improbably, but the beautiful intelligence of the planetary world, it never ceases to amaze me how these things take place. There's so much intelligence in them that these guys hold hands and together go through the 0 degree Aries point, which people seem to agree in the astrological world is the most important degree. And so there they go. On February 13th, that's when Neptune's going to actually finish up its time in Pisces on January 25th. It's going to move into to Aries on the 26th. And we did have some time last year of these guys. Both Saturn and Neptune did go into early Aries, and then they went back for the winter and the last part of this year and the beginning of this year into back into Pisces. So again, we're in the great dissolve. It's supposed to be kind of chaotic and confusing and wet and, messy. If we look at all the governments, which is what Saturn represents, like it's a messy, messy time. But when we move through that gateway, February 13th, that's going to take place. We're already going to be in priming ourselves for the Firehorse year. So I just want to highlight this is the season of the long exhale, and you want to take advantage of it. Don't be galloping forward yet, because that ignition with both the Aries shifts and the fire horse is going to grab us all, and like pull us into the future in such a hot, active way. Let yourself be in the dream. Let yourself be in the long exhale. Um, let's see. I just want to see what else in January. Just want to highlight that the last week of January is it's red flag with Mars, Pluto, and Sun in Aquarius. So I'll talk about that in my weeklies. If you don't subscribe to my weeklies, you can do that. They're free. They come to your inbox every week, and I do my best to keep you guys aware of what's coming. Then we move into February. So February is always begun with the cross-quarter holy day of Imbolc that takes place right at the start of the month. And in the Northern Hemisphere, it's a very beautiful, pure, sacred holy day that's represented by snowdrops and candles. And it's the very earliest creaking open of the doorway into springtime. Spring equinox is not the start of spring. It's the gateway into the zodiac begin, and it's the full moon energy. Imbolc is really the very quiet, slow begin. So February we'll see Uranus turning direct. That's going to be just a couple days after Imbolc, so we'll already be feeling it as soon as the month kicks off. And Uranus is the great awakener, the trickster, redeemer, liberating planet whose job is to help us upgrade our lives. It's the planet that takes us into the future. And when any planet stations, it means that it gets the microphone. The energy gets very loud around that planet. And so this will be Uranus's last station direct in Taurus, and before it moves into Gemini. So be prepared for things to be, if we're looking at the last week of January being red flag, and then we move into this Uranus direct, and then, 10 days later, we have the Saturn, Neptune moving into Aries for good. Buckle your seatbelts. This is the launch. And then Chinese New Year is February 17th. So that's the initiation into a year of this Firehorse energy. And then we'll also have a Mercury retrograde in Pisces in February. So the Mercury retrogrades this year are going to be in water. That's the way they work. They're always in a single element. So in late Pisces, oh wait, we also have an eclipse that's going to happen in February. So the eclipses for part of the year are still going to be in Virgo Pisces, but they're going to begin to overlap with the Aquarius Leo, because that's what happens as the nodes get close to shifting. We have some in the old and some in the new. So this is going to be a solar eclipse that is in Aquarius. That's the Chinese New Year, So not just Chinese New Year, not just Firehorse kickoff, but an eclipse, because we just needed to make it super intense. And then and then we slip into the Pisces season, which does feel really good. We have Mars going into Pisces on March 3rd. That's a very soft energy. So we'll have some softness that's happening. And then we're going to have another eclipse that's taking place. That's early March also. So Mars goes into Pisces on the same day that we have an eclipse in Virgo, total lunar eclipse in Virgo. So my feelings around eclipses, I was going to do a whole slide on eclipses, but I think I'm just going to talk about this part of it now. The Vedics, I feel like, have the strongest lore about eclipses because they've been at it the longest. So I really take what they have to say about eclipses seriously. And they consider them to be all low-key malefic events. Some of them are worse than others, but in general, let the gods do what they're going to do out there. You don't need to take that eclipsing light into your optic nerve. We're really sensitive to light and dark. We're completely cued to light and dark, way more than we even realize. There's a lot of problems in the modern world that are light-based. And so eclipse is definitely a place that you can make a personal decision that you don't need to see that. When there's one that can be seen, people like to see them. If you like to see them, you can make your own decisions. But my counsel is life's complicated enough. Why add, input that potentially could be malefic? Just kind of sit it out. And then another tip, actually, So that second Virgo eclipse last year, that one was, it was on my moon and a couple of other people in the community. It was landing in an intense way. So one of the things you can do if an eclipse is going to hit your chart in a hard way is you can get some plates, go to a thrift store and get some plates and break dishes a little bit before the eclipse. And then you give, it's sympathetic magic. You're giving that breaking energy a place to go so it doesn't have to break something in your life. All right, so March is a very big year. I mean, a very big month. Sorry, yeah, March. Sorry, let me just find myself in my notes. And so this is from a movie. It's a really old movie, The Legend of Billie Jean, and there's a great song that's from the soundtrack. And the words to the song are, "We can't afford to be innocent. Stand up and face the enemy. It's a do or die situation. We will be invincible." So Pisces, Saturn and Neptune in Pisces is peak victim. The biggest shadow of Pisces is escapist, victim, martyr. Oh my God, poor me. Everybody has to take care of me. I'm not okay. You all have to do everything around my special needs. And, I mean, that's a legitimate way to treat certain people, but we've been at a peak. Or in a trough is more likely, a cultural trough of victimhood. And this, in no uncertain terms, shifts very dramatically with the Saturn and Neptune going into Aries. That's the signature of the hero. It's the signature of the brash, fiery adolescent warrior who's got the big sword, who's, maybe being clumsy, maybe being stupid, but a lot of bravado, a lot of a lot of ignition. And the world is changing. I'm not going to candy coat it for you guys. There's a lot of war symbolism that's in this year. I wish there wasn't. I hope it plays out in other ways, but what we can do ourselves is find what in us can we heal? Where are we going to war in places that maybe are unnecessary or excessive? Sometimes you have to go to war. Sometimes you have to defend yourself. Sometimes you have to be the aggressor. There's lots of different situations where you can't just sit by and be passive. And what this transition suggests is that we are entering a number of different situations where each one of us is going to need to learn to find that heroic sovereignty inside of ourselves where we refuse to be oppressed. We refuse to be abused. We won't take it anymore. This is the point. This is the year 2026, and 2027 is the year that we won't take it anymore. And Pluto in Aquarius is the sign of revolution, just period. If you look back in historical mundane astrology, most of the revolutions, the big famous ones, are under Pluto and Aquarius. I mean, the French, super famous French Revolution, Pluto and Aquarius, the Civil War, the American Revolution, this is all Pluto and Aquarius. And power to the people, the people rising up and saying, this isn't working for us. The shadow side is collectivism. The shadow side is communism. I do feel like that's a legitimate danger again at this point. So everything is aligning for you. Everything is giving you the opportunity to align, I would say, is more the thing. The passive version would be everything is aligning for you. The active version is you're aligning it for yourself. But, when Saturn goes from a squishy, mutable water sign into a cardinal fire sign, we will suddenly notice how soft the Saturn actually has been. I was listening to Chris and Gordon on Rune Soup talk about H1, and Austin was using the metaphor of dry rot, for the Saturn in Pisces, and I think that's pretty apt. When we look around at the powers that should be, there's quite a bit of dry rot going on. So nothing stays stagnant, nothing stays in stasis. Everything changes, everything cycles around the wheel of the year, whether it's a giant cycle like Neptune or a tiny cycle like the moon. All of these pieces around the wheel, all of these building blocks of this beautiful symbolic language of astrology, they all represent parts of our life, and they're going to get activated at different parts. And this is, the material that we're working on. So the fire horse, it's going to ask a lot of us. It's going to ask, you're an animal, you have, whatever animal you are will have some relationship to the horse archetype, the fire horse archetype in particular. And it's going to be easier for some than others. But as when you're doing a reading for somebody or you're trying to figure some stuff out, one of the things that you're going to do is you're going to look at their natal chart, you're going to look at transits, you're going to look at solar arc, you're going to look at progressions, and you're looking for repeating testimony. You're looking for things. It's like, oh, there's a Mars thing. Oh, there's another Mars thing. Okay, in 3 charts, I'm seeing a significant Mars thing. You're stacking testimony. So that's what you're looking for to understand, what is the nature of a year going to be? What are the most significant transits that are going to stand out? And when you have Saturn and Neptune going into Aries within a week of the sun, I mean the fire horse year getting activated, you just know. So what do we know about really intense ramping up? We've all experienced it. Some of us are fire signs, some of us live in that ramp up, some of us just experience it sometimes. But we need to take care of our nervous system and we need to take care of our adrenals. And, at this stage of the game, I think everybody should be having Tulsi tea all day long. Like whatever nervine adaptogenic brew that you're inclined to do, it's time to do it tonically. The way to work with herbs is like they're like paintbrushes. You paint your system, you layer it and you layer it and you layer it. And this is the buildup of the good stuff. You can't just take a pill and be like, okay, I've got Tulsi in me. You want it as a regular tool. So again, eclipses, I'll just tell you here when they're going to be. So we have, let's see if this is all of them. I think this is all of them. Okay, so we talked about the annular solar eclipse, new moon in Aquarius, February 17th, which again brings in Chinese New Year. This is, no, that's separate. Okay, then we have the next eclipse is on March 3rd. And then we skip, so the eclipses are every year, there's either 2 or 3 at a time, usually 2, but sometimes 3, and they're always 6 months apart. And they're based on where the nodes are. And the nodes, if you don't know, that is a shorthand word that refers most often to the moon's nodes, but technically every planet has nodes. And what they are is, here's the Earth going around the sun. This is one ecliptic ring. And then we have the moon going around the Earth. So these 2 ecliptic rings intersect, and those 2 ecliptic points, those are the nodal points. They're exactly opposite from each other, and they're slowly moving backwards. There's some things that go forwards, and there's some things that go backwards. Nodes go backwards. So the nodes, the moon's nodes, are going to spend 18 months in a set of signs. And as such, there will be one north node and one south node. And the south node is the purge point. It's showing us what we're letting go of. This is the point of, if you do medicine work, then you know what an ayahuasca purge bucket is. Otherwise, just you're clearing out. Right now, the nodes are in Pisces and Virgo. The north node is in Pisces, the south node is in Virgo. So the Virgo archetype is not normal. It is being rehabilitated. It's being reconstructed and rehabilitated. So, so the 6 month spacing between the eclipses, and then, what else to say about it? So eclipses we call it eclipse season. When the first eclipse happens, we've entered eclipse season. And I think it's Adam Summers that coined the term Bardo babies for people that are born in the eclipse window. You might be born actually on an eclipse. The current United States president was born under a lunar eclipse, a blood moon lunar eclipse, which is, it tracks, right? Um, but some people are born not on an eclipse, but within, like in between 2 or before the window closes, and this is an amplification of their chart. the nodal stuff in general is an amplification. Anything that's close to a node, or if the nodes are moving and a planet sidles up to the nodes, that planet is going to be massively amplified. There's going to be an amplification of the themes, or if there's a planet right at the middle of wherever the nodes are. So the second set of eclipses in the later summer, we have August 12th, there's a total solar eclipse. And then on August 28th, there's a partial lunar eclipse. So, and then after those finish up, it means that we're going to wrap up the rest of this South Node Virgo, North Node Pisces time. And this is the axis of order and chaos, Virgo being order, Pisces being chaos. And, it's the trust in God type, your camel axis. And normally, Virgo is a very active sign. It's sorting out things all the time. It's one of the biggest problem-solving archetypes that there is. And as such, it periodically, sorry, really needs a vacation. So I don't know if it completely feels like it's having a vacation. I'm a Virgo. And um, yeah, it's not a complete vacation, but it's an opportunity to lean into the polarity point of Pisces. For me, I've got 4 planets in Virgo. So it feels really good to need to lean into Pisces. And I remember at the beginning of this Alexis Coyote Moon astrology called the North Node in Pisces, which kicked off conjunct Neptune, a trust fall into infinity or something very close to that. And I was like, that's good. That is what we're being asked to do because I mean, look where we are. Like nobody feels super secure or good about what's going on the planet. It's bonkers. And this is when we really are asked to lean into the fact that this is a spiritual experience that we're having, but it's a human experience that we're having, right? We come here to have this human experience. And so being humans, we it's more the Virgo realm in that we're like, oh gosh, we have to figure out how to fix things in a way that it feels comfortable here. But then Pisces is in the giant womb of God where we just trust and we know that no matter what things look like, that ultimately we are protected, trusted, and loved by God, and ultimately we go back to God. So that's where we are right now. And that's going to continue. Like I said, the nodes move backwards. So I think they're around 10 degrees right now, Virgo and Pisces, somewhere in there. And they'll slowly keep moving till we get all the way to 0. And then in late July, the nodes will shift into Aquarius and Leo. So then we're going to have the South Node is going to spend 18 months moving through Leo. So this will be the Leo part of your chart. If you're using whole sign, it'll be a whole house. If you're using quadrant, it'll be part of 2 different houses. And again, starting at 29 and going all the way to 0. And then the North Node will be moving through Aquarius, and again, starting at 29, moving to 0. So this is interesting because this means that then the Aquarius archetype will be bracketed by North Node and Pluto. Whoops, I think it should be like that. Or Pluto's on this end. Pluto's, in the first few degrees, and the North Node will begin to go like this. So that will be very interesting. It will create all sorts of interesting conversations in the Aquarius Leo axis. And it means that all the eclipses will begin to be in Leo and Aquarius. So if you have Leo and Aquarius degrees or nodes, if you have Leo and Aquarius nodes, it means that you will have a nodal return in either 2026 or 2027. And if you have, these Virgo Pisces nodes, it means you're finishing up either a nodal return or a nodal opposition, which is what happens at the midpoint. If you have a North Node in Virgo and a South Node in Pisces, then you've had to go back to the beginning to move forward for this period of time. So Jupiter and Leo, let's talk first a little bit about Jupiter and Cancer because it's still there for a long time. It's not going to go in until I think late July. Um, so Jupiter is, again, the great benefic. Some people call him Santa Claus, Jove, Thor, Zeus. It's Dionysus. It's this big optimistic, wants to help, excitable planetary god who's quite attractive, right? Rules Sagittarius, rules Pisces, and moves in 12-year cycles. So we're finishing up. Well, I mean, we're not even really finishing yet. We're just halfway through Jupiter in Cancer. And Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, so it means that Jupiter is able to achieve its goals of expansiveness. I think of Jupiter as a big greenhouse tent that gets dropped over something. It's a warm, wet nature. Mars is intemperate heat. Jupiter is this warm, wet. And so there's this really supportive way that it helps us grow things. So if you drop a Jupiter tent over something for a year, we're at 11 months, how long it spends in a sign, then that part of your chart life is going to get grown in a good way. That said, Jupiter does big up anything, and so it is possible to have even the benefic Jupiter in an exalted place big up something that's uncomfortable. For example, we've had Jupiter in Cancer square to Chiron in Aries for a while. It's been a couple months. It's maybe even been a few months by the time it's totally done. Such an uncomfortable pain body thing. So, on the one hand, we've had this fantastic Jupiter in Cancer, which is very Virgin Mary, if you're not inclined in that direction, Divine Mother. Whoever speaks to you in the Divine Mother department, that's what Jupiter in Cancer feels like is giving to us. So, this really lovely trine conversation between the North Node in Pisces and then to Jupiter in Cancer. And of course, Jupiter is ruling that North Node in Pisces. So, there's been this really sweet kind of ongoing thing that's been happening between them. And we'll continue to get some version of that. And then it's going to shift. And then we're going to get Jupiter in Leo. So, I like to talk about in my classes about how the archetypes are really almost opposite each other. If we want to understand kind of the way that the energy moves through the zodiac, let's just start with Aries. You've got cardinal earth, cardinal fire. You've got, the great masterpiece of Pisces. And then you've got this like whoosh ignition, so intense. And then it burns really hot through the Aries season. It initiates all sorts of things, animals mating, plants blooming, seeds cracking. But then we reach the point of exhaustion. After the sun's been in an archetype for a month, we're done. We're ready to move on. And we've fully spent ourselves. So if we will, in late July of 2026, fully have exhausted this Jupiter and Cancer energy, then we'll like whoosh, move into this really fiery, expansive Jupiter and Leo. So if Cancer is cardinal water, its main concern is security and safety. From that position, after Cancer knows it's safe, it can build empires, kind of along the same lines as Capricorn, different kinds of empires, family empires, emotional empires, but still, but that like base level really have to feel safe and secure. The exoskeleton that surrounds the crab, like all this tender underbelly, mush softness, and then these like pinchers that's protecting it. So extremely emotional. And then we'll move into this really creative solar ruled Jupiter that wants to create, it wants to play. Jupiter's job, Leo's job is to it's to create a light in the darkness. That's kind of what humanity is partly here to do. But this sense of like, okay, I've been born. I live here on Earth. I'm having this incarnation. We have many, but this is the one I'm in right now. If I have really strong Leo in me, I have an inordinate need to contribute to the life force in a lasting way. And the first way that that could be done, the most obvious way is to have children, create children, entire beings that leave your body and grow up and go out into the world and have their own destiny. But that's only one category. You can have lots of children. You can have musical children. You can have literature children. If you read a book or a song, it's that joyful art of creation that's play. It's child's mind. It's child's heart. It's it's the counterpoint to Pluto and Aquarius. Pluto and Aquarius is so mental. Aquarius is the most mental sign. It's brilliant. And if Aquarius had its way, it would just be pure mind. It would not be body. It wouldn't have emotions. It really doesn't like those energies because it slows them down. If you think about Aquarius being quincunx or inconjunct to the Cancer signature, you see the difference between them. You know, Cancer's like all the feelings, and Aquarius is like none of the feelings. Thank you very much. And so Leo rules the heart, rules the spine, and it's the polarity point, thus the antidote, counterpoint to all that mental brilliance, fixed air, fixed fire. So along comes Jupiter and Leo to bring us an inclination to participate in the dance more. I feel like we've all been kind of a little bit getting dragged behind the horse. Jupiter in Cancer is wonderful, but it's not super creative in the same way. And what I feel like Jupiter in Cancer has been doing is kind of it's the cleanup crew for the Pluto in Capricorn. You know, because all of the Capricorns and the Cancers from 2008 to 2024 went through the ringer. And Capricorn's a much tougher sign than Cancer, ultimately. Cancer is really sensitive. And that was a rigorous, egregious thing to go through, no matter, no matter what planet it was, no matter what stage of it all. I guarantee you, I talked to a lot of people in this line of work, and it's really clear when you have a Pluto transit and when it's Pluto opposite something in Cancer, unforgettable. So those, harsh, tender tissues are getting soothed by this Jupiter in Cancer. So when Jupiter in Cancer finishes, then I feel like Jupiter's new job is to be anchoring the polarity point in Leo. And I think it's interesting that, again, the divine intelligence, it doesn't line up where it's like, okay, Pluto's at 3 degrees and now Jupiter's at 3 degrees. It's like, no, they're actually at opposite ends of the archetype. So we have this huge bracketed, all 60 degrees of both archetypes that are will be vibrating with this Jupiter-Pluto opposition by sign. Eventually there will be a moment where there's, I don't know how close it'll get, but there won't be an exact opposition at all. It's more just this like these archetypes, like really amplifying these archetypes. And what I should have put in here was the cover to The Dark Side of the Moon, the Pink Floyd album, because that's what I always think of with the Leo Aquarius polarity. It's like this prismatic beauty and intelligence that comes through. It's like the mind is the prism, the Aquarius mind, and then the like refraction of all of the incredible beauty that can be created. So we're leveling up. We're individually leveling up. We're leveling up as a species, as a culture. It's messy. There's no guarantees, but we're being given some big pieces with which to pull our souls back into our bodies. We've all been through a lot of trauma. We've all been through a lot of trauma even before 2020 started because life has trauma. And it seems to be designed this way. It seems to be how we get rock tumbled through these lives. But we can get kind of stuck. We can get susto, as they call it in Latin American cultures, which I think is their kind of magical term for PTSD, maybe CPTSD, where you really get stuck. And we don't have to stay stuck. We all have the capacity to heal. The body wants to heal. There's an innate urge for the body to heal. And the body heals in play. The spirit heals in play. The emotions heal in play. So Jupiter in Leo is bringing this beautiful essence of play. And I just want to remind you, you are your own guru. And this is always true, but never so much as this age of Aquarius that we're entering. Rick Levine, who's a real smart guy and really good with astromath, he insists that we don't officially enter the age of Aquarius until it's about 100 years off, but I maintain we certainly have to be, at the edge of the continent with Pluto and Aquarius and all this other stuff going on. But don't give away your power. Don't give it away to the groupthink. The biggest danger of the Aquarius, Pluto and Aquarius, is groupthink. It's the true clarion call is individuation. How authentic can you possibly be? That is your key. That is your key to everything. If you're taking your cues from society, if you're taking cues from your friends, if you're taking cues from your spouse, and it's not truly where you're at, there will be some lessons that help you shift that over the next 20 years of this Pluto and Aquarius. So, the astrology wants to be worked, your chart wants to be lived. The transits are here for us. And we all incarnated on purpose for this Pluto in Aquarius journey. And I posit that it will be the biggest change, the biggest 20-year change. I mean, I think in 10 years, the world's going to be unrecognizable with the way things are going. So find your center, find your own spiritual practice. Do not look outside of yourself for leaders right now. Okay, we're only in April. Let's see what's going on in April. So in April, we have Uranus stepping into Gemini for good, and there is a wild Aries stellium all month. So incredibly fiery and electric April. Firehorse, all the Aries, Aries sextiles Aquarius. And so early degree, anything that goes into early degrees now, any planets that are moving into 0 degrees, you're like, okay, who are they talking to? Fixed planets, any or signs, any sign, any planet entering a fixed sign is going to be briefly either opposing, squaring, or conjuncting Pluto and Aquarius. And anybody after late April that moves into anything that moves into air or fire that's mutable, that's going to be squaring, conjuncting, or opposing Uranus. And all of these guys are talking to each other. That's the real thing to understand here, why we're in such a unique moment astrologically, because when any outer planet changes signs, it's a big deal. It's super detected, it's super noticeable. I remember in 2018 when I was in my training and thus was starting to track planetary shifts really closely, more closely than I had up to this point. And I went to bed. I was visiting my parents, and I wonder if anything's gonna happen in the world because Uranus is it's was it entering? No, it was even earlier. I think it was when it wasn't 2018. That's when Uranus went into Taurus. This was Uranus going into Aries, so it was much earlier. And I wasn't even out of bed. I think it was 2009. The next morning, and I was getting all of these tsunami warning texts from New Zealand, where my mom lives, Hawaii, where my cousin lives, um, because there had been the Fukushima earthquake. That was on the first day of Uranus moving into Aries. And then I remember every station, there was something that happened with the volcano in Hawaii. It was crazy how super tight it was, this like very dramatic tectonic fiery response. So, um, so if we have Saturn and Neptune at 0 degrees Aries, and we've got Pluto at 1, 2, 3 Aquarius, we've got fire and we've got air. So we know that fire feeds air. This is a sextile conversation. It's friendly. They like each other. But when outer planets like each other, it's like, okay, stand back because these are very powerful elemental beings. You know, they don't move in subtle ways. And then when Uranus goes into Gemini, then we've got Uranus in air, we've got Saturn and Neptune in fire, and we've got Pluto in air. So this configuration, the way that they look on the chart, you have to look at it, but it's traveling together for a long time. So the fourth turning, which I was saying I was going to bring up again, you know, this is a concept. There's a book by um, I think I'm confusing it with Strunk and White, which was a writing book from high school. That's the no Elements of Styles by Strunk and White. This book, The Fourth Turning, is by Strauss and Howe, I think. If you Google the fourth turning, you'll find it. I think those are the authors. So every 100 years, approximately, and it correlates pretty closely with the Uranian cycle, which is 84 years. There, everything changes. There's a huge reset of culture, and we're at one of those points. So the United States has Uranus in Gemini, so it means we're going to be having another. We've had many Uranian returns. So Pluto in Aquarius, Uranian return. The United States has a 27-degree Aquarius moon, so revolution is baked into the cake of the United States for many reasons, including astrologically. It also has an Aquarius South node, so you know we know the origin story of the United States. It is literally revolutionary. So it's all being set up. I mean, you guys have been living on the planet for the last 5 years too, and we've watched all of these different countries putting themselves into place. All the theaters of war are growing. I haven't seen anybody back down for any reason at all. There's been the tactical strikes here and there. There's been this skirmish and that skirmish, but it feels like, we're orienting towards world war, and it's going to look different than any other war on this scale has because we're in the age of air, and now drone warfare is a big part of it. But also, this is a spiritual war and it's for your minds. So the war is taking place in the social media realm. It's taking place in propaganda. It's taking place everywhere. So be very careful, be very hygienic with where you get your information and don't get indigestion, consume some media this year and then take a long break. Like there's a lot of talk about wanting to go back to analog. Build analog back into your life any way that you can. I mean, look at this image. This is Tesla. This is Tesla just calmly reading a book in front of his, arcing Tesla coil. Like, vow to be like him, vow to be calm in the face of whatever is coming our way. We are in charge of what's inside of ourselves, and we have the ability to work with different things that help us, but we have to take care of our vehicle. Actually, this is a good segue for the fact that I am working on a Substack article that is about health, that is about how to take care of ourselves. So it's not done, so it won't be in this, but it will be out soon if you're interested in more of this from me. So Uranus leaving Taurus and Scorpio for Gemini and Sag. Uranus is an electrical planet. So whether it's in the sign of the human body, and we over the last 7 years we've had Uranus influencing land, money, body, food, home, all things that we really like to be very stable, and they've been anything but. We've seen huge changes in like the crypto world over the last 7 years. It's become legitimized essentially. I was an early adopter when it was super weird. Nobody really knew what I was talking about, and now the institutions are in Bitcoin. So that took place over this period of time, and now we're going to pivot. And communication is the realm of Gemini. If you think about Gemini is the communicating sign, that's its main job. And, I have Taurus Scorpio because Uranus went through 7 years of Taurus, Uranus opposed 7 years of Scorpio. Uranus will spend 7 years in Gemini, it will oppose 7 years of Sag. And it's just as big of a transit in opposition, honestly. And, the squares are also big. The Leo Aquarius was affected not as much by Uranus and Taurus, but still, the squares are huge when you actually have one in your chart. And then, of course, Pisces Virgo is the other part of the mutable cross. So the Pisces Virgos will also be feeling this Uranian energy. It's very, very fluid and ungrounding. Whenever I talk about Uranus for any reason, I always immediately want to talk about grounding because we are lightning rods in general. We're electrical beings. We used to be barefoot. We're designed to be barefoot on the earth, but now we just wear shoes all the time, most of the time with rubber soles, which breaks the connection. And we need that electron transfer, and we need it now more than ever. So as this planetary shift happens, that's going to be April 27th. If you have zero early degrees of Gemini, like it's time, early degrees of Sag, early degrees of Virgo Pisces, it's going to be a square. You will feel this one. And you want to use all your grounding practices. It's going to be very important because it's a good transit. It wants to stimulate and elevate and so many ideas. But if you're already ungrounded and you're already kind of, rocked energetically in your body, then this is going to be a harder transit. May, of course, May kicks off with Beltane, the wonderful cross-quarter day that is also called, well, it's also called May Day. And it is the creek gateway opening to summertime. My course wheel of the year, if you like this kind of information, this is the sort of stuff that we talk about. So Beltane is a very fecund, fertile, wonderful, jubilant, juicy celebration of the rising of the life force in May. Begins with Taurus season. So inside of May, we have Pluto retrograde. Pluto stations retrograde at 5 degrees Aquarius on May 6th. So The outer planets have very regular retrogrades. The inner planets, I mean, Mercury, as we know, 3 times a year, every year in one element. We already talked that it's in water this year. But Pluto, Uranus, Neptune, Saturn, Jupiter, like all those guys, they have very predictable retrograde cycles. There's a point, it's like, okay, Pluto's stationing retrograde in May. This is around the time that it does every year. You'll see other ones too. Sometimes, I'll laugh because I'll see TikTok astrologers be like, "Oh my God, everything is retrograde." It's like it's summer. It's supposed to be, it's a natural state of affairs. It's like the tide goes in, the tide goes out. And retrogrades aren't to punish. They get treated that way, but they're part of the medicine. It's part of the medicinal dive. So on May 6th, we're going to get the first and only Pluto retrograde station in Aquarius, and then it's going to go, let's see, I guess it's stationing to go retrograde. So it's been cruising forward. This will be the farthest that it's gotten so far. It'll have reached 5 degrees. So if you have anything at 5 degrees Aquarius, Leo, Scorpio, or Taurus, or 0 to 5, or even we could go to like probably 7 or 8, you will definitely be feeling this. And from this point, Pluto moves so slow that when it stations, it's already been sitting at the station degree for a while, and it will sit at the station degree for a while. But again, it amplifies the message. So May sees Pluto having a megaphone and talking about death, rebirth, transformation, and rapid acceleration a la Aquarius. So mid-May, Mars and Chiron conjunct, and we begin to wrap up Chiron in Aries. So Chiron is the wounded healer. He's an asteroid, and he's an important one. I don't do a ton of work with asteroids consistently. I like my charts really clean, but you got to hand it to Chiron. He's a major player. So we've all been doing, everybody who's had Chiron and Aries has had their Chiron return over the last span of years. And we're going to be moving to Chiron and Taurus, which is a big deal. And it's a big deal partly because it's going to square Pluto right away. And I think of Chiron and Taurus as a real clear witch wound. I'm a firm believer in reincarnation, and we know that by some accounts, it was 500 years of burning women, mostly women. It wasn't all women, but witches, anybody that was like weird and beautiful and talented with plants and medicine and healing and, all that really great stuff. So if you have a Chiron in Taurus, that's what I think it is like, okay, you're back and you need to heal feeling safe in your body, reclaiming your body, that you are allowed to be beautiful, powerful, and nobody's going to kill you for it. So the fact that everybody's going to start to have their Chiron returns in Taurus and it's going to be square Pluto really amplifies this. Like the stakes are really high, and the need to reclaim our sovereignty and safety in our bodies is important. We're living in a time where the tech is not just on the outside anymore. It's starting to go inside of people's bodies. And that is a Rubicon moment. That's no small thing. So, what are we? What is human? What is biological? What is natural? What is tech? What is modified? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to stay human? These questions are going to get louder and louder and louder. And I think that Chiron moving into Taurus is going to be like a big gong with that theme. So the last week of May, we have Mars and Taurus square Pluto. That's a red flag week. And then we also have Sun conjunct Uranus and Gemini square the nodes. So May looks to be pretty activated. If we've got the Pluto retrograde, and then we've got a Chiron Mars in mid-May, and then we have this stuff. Yeah, May looks like it's going to be a big month. All right, June 19th. I guess it's June 19th when Chiron officially moves into Taurus. And we will have the solstice, which is always so wonderful. And then Mercury will go retrograde in Cancer on the 29th. So we will have our second retrograde of the year, again in water. And it will go, yeah, it'll go for a while. 3.5 weeks. That's what it always goes. So, and to just little pep talk about the Mercury retrogrades, if because it's important to time things. It's important to time things using the retrogrades. And, Mercury retrograde is not the kiss of death. I always, I've been taught in classes that Apple and Google and maybe even Microsoft were all launched with the Mercury retrograde. Clearly, these are very successful companies. It's more like if you have the ability, if you have something big, if you initiate it before the retrograde begins, then it doesn't matter. You can do whatever you need to do during the retrograde. And then also, the most sensitive times of the retrograde are, unless it is, aspecting something in your chart, that's different. But the beginning and the end, the entrance and the exit, the stations, this is when the planet again comes very slow, to like almost to a stop. It looks like a stop. And that's when all of the most squirrely stuff happens with the Mercury retrograde. So, for example, if you're going on a trip, try and leave before or after the station. It's usually only 3 days, so it's not that big of a deal. The last days of June, we've got Mars and Gemini on Uranus, and those are square the nodes, and that goes into the first week of July. So again, we've got a pretty spicy, electric, kind of unsettled conditions. When I see Mars on the nodes and or Uranus with the nodes, these are the two most likely signatures for things to happen in the world in a big way. Like October 7th, that was a red flag day because of a Mars thing. I can't think of any other examples offhand, but as an astrologer, those are the ones that I'm always kind of nervously watching. It's like, um, for example, if there's any sort of bubble, like, we're all living in this economy, we know that it's pretty rocky right now. And what you're looking for, it's like a bubble is a bubble, but like what's gonna pop it? That's when you're kind of looking at the Mars stuff because Mars is like a needle. So oh, here's our June slide. Yeah, it's an intense month, so please be gentle with yourselves. Please be gentle with yourselves all year. Please take these Neptune and Pisces, this essence of kind sweetness that can be found within that signature, and absorb it, inhale it, like have this gentle, resilient buffer of soft sweetness because it's gonna be such an intense, fiery year. Like go to the water this year. Find the water for yourself. Take lots of baths. Set up an outdoor shower. Start cold dipping. Go get your feet in the water. If you are feeling out of sorts and you live near the coast, go straight to the coast. Go walk along the shore. Get your feet wet. Walk where the wet sand is with bare feet. That electron exchange, it happens immediately and it feels so much better. We are nature. We are part of this, and we get so dysregulated with all of the artificial lights and all the tech. And it's just as simple as going outside and letting yourself get cued by what we were designed to be cued with. Again, some of this is in my Substack. Okay, July. July is when we have Jupiter into Leo. Woohoo! We also have Lammas. That's the first day. No, sorry, that's the end of July. I'm ahead of myself. Um, so Jupiter into Leo is totally worth celebrating. So exciting. And then also at the start, in the first week of July, we're going to have our first Neptune station retrograde. So it will have made it to 4 degrees Aries. So if you have anything between 0 and 4 degrees Aries, you are having a big Neptunian experience. And Neptune's job is to spiritualize your life. If you are deeply connected to spirit, then Neptune is going to feel less the need to dissolve things that are in the way. But if you're just like so busy, not at all having any version of a spiritual reality, not touching in, no prayer, no meditation, you're going to get sideswiped by a Neptune transit because it's going to insist that you take the time out. And the way to tell if you're having a Neptune transit that is like a little bit rougher is you feel like you're lost in a fog bank. You feel like you're in a boat with no oars and you need to somehow move. And the only way you can do it is through spiritual practice. So Saturn will do its first station retrograde in Aries on the 26th of July. and that'll be at 14 degrees. So if you have anything between 0 and 14 degrees Aries, you will have had a very strong Saturn transit between February 14th and July 26th. So yeah, July's big because both Neptune and Saturn will be, they've been cruising along and then they're going to like come to a stop. And then remember, it's this Aries energy. So a retrograde, a station either direction, retrograde or direct, is this settling down amplification. So if we have a fireball that's kind of hovering, that's a certain kind of vibe. Um, okay, so we have the nodal axis shift into Leo and Aquarius on July 28th. So there's a lot that happens in July also. This is such an active year. And then late July is the Sun conjunct Jupiter, opposite Pluto. Not tightly, but still, that's a big moment. So interesting, it looks like the last week or two of June, July, and August all have this real intense kind of, I don't know if it's all Pluto. I think it might be maybe. Oh, wait, backing up. The first week of June has the Venus Jupiter conjunction in late Cancer. And we had that once already. It was so nice. I was in Europe and it was like it was on tap. It was like honey on tap. It was so good. And so in this year where there's so much fire, I want to highlight for you this first week in June with this Venus Jupiter in late Cancer because it's going to go into Leo and that's going to be the end of it. And you want this, this is a time to just have a staycation or go somewhere fun. It's really tender. It's a really tender-hearted transit. Okay, August. August, mostly we're just going to talk about the fact that there is a total solar eclipse. We already highlighted it, but there's one on the 12th and there's a partial lunar eclipse on the 28th. So August is largely eclipse season. And then eclipse season doesn't close. This is an important point. You've had one eclipse, you've had a second eclipse if there's just two, and then it has to be the next lunation after that. So if this was a full moon eclipse, this was a new moon eclipse, because they're always going to be solar than lunar, or vice versa. They're going to alternate. You're going to have one of each. Then you'll go 2 more weeks, and then whatever that next full or new moon is, that's when you're closing the doors and eclipse season clears. September. September, we're going to have Uranus station retrograde for the first time in Gemini. That's going to happen on September 10th, and it's going to be at 5 degrees Gemini. So, highlighting the degree in that if you have anything around 5 degrees Gemini, Sag, Virgo, or Pisces, you will feel that. And know that the first 5 degrees this year of Gemini are what are going to get transited before the retrograde happens. And then at the end of September, we've got Mars in Cancer square Chiron, and that's pretty uncomfortable. So again, another end of the month kind of sensitivity. Virgo season, it's so wonderful. So I'm happy because this is when we get to reclaim Virgo season after the South Node moving through it for 18 months. And the Virgo season is so important because Virgo is Virgo is what keeps everything healthy and on track. It's a really wonderful, misunderstood archetype. October, getting down towards the end of the year. So October is kind of intense because we've got Mars opposite Pluto through mid-October. You want to know that this is happening because this is the kind of transit that just can pop off so easily. So easy to get into arguments, say things you didn't mean to say, you wished you didn't say it. Then we have a Venus retrograde in the Via Combusta, and it kicks off at 8 degrees Scorpio on September 3rd. Okay, so whoops, that's in the wrong month. We didn't talk about that in September, but I am telling you in September, on September 3rd, we begin this Venus retrograde. The Via Combusta, it's like a really old-fashioned term that describes 15 degrees Libra to 15 degrees Scorpio. It translates as the fiery way. And in kind of, it's probably like gypsy lore that anybody born in that time is extra passionate and intense, and anything that takes place in that time is extra intense. So the fact that we're already going to have, Venus in Scorpio is already super spicy. I love it. It's a great Venus. Um, and then it's going to be retrograde, so that's a, more intense expression of it. And then it's going to be in the Via Combusta. So what else do we have going on in October? Then we have, well, sorry, that again is it starts in September and it's probably 6 weeks all the way through. Venus direct. Yeah, Venus direct on October 14th. So September 3rd through October 14th. And the Venus retrogrades happen every couple of years. And it's like the Venus and the Mars retrogrades kind of take turns. So we'll have this one, and then at some point soon after that we'll have a Mars retrograde. So Pluto will go direct on at 3 degrees on the 16th of October. And then Mercury is going to go retrograde. This is our third retrograde of the year. This is going to be in Scorpio, this one on September 24th. And then we're just in Scorpio season. And then we already talked about the Venus and Scorpio retrograde. So if you don't know what the Venus retrogrades do, it's really super cool. If you look at a Mars retrograde over 8 years or so, it's super messy. There's no rhyme or reason. But if you look at a Venus retrograde from the perspective of Earth, looking at the pattern Venus makes with her retrograde direct over an 8-year period, forms a perfect five-pointed star, a pentagram. And this is super neat because five is a number associated with Venus and it's linked to rose. And if you look at rose, if you study taxonomy and botanical art, you understand that all rose is pentacular, meaning it's down to five. You can pull off all the petals and you will see that with the sepals, it starts as a base of five. So any plants that have that same five-petaled thing are Venus plants, like apple has that, all the berries have it. So it's just this beautiful, clear linking of the symbolic lore of Venus having, perfection and glory and beauty, this form. And then you look up and you see this incredible Venus number symbol that she makes in the sky. It's wild. So this is, the Sagittarius Scorpio realm is one of my favorites. We're all dying. Say the thing now. That's about as Sag Scorpio as it gets. November. So that particular Mercury retrograde that starts on, wait, I don't know. I think it started sorry, my notes are a little confusing, but we'll just focus on November. Wherever it began, the Mercury direct, excitingly, is happening on Friday the 13th at 5 degrees Scorpio. And then Venus will go direct on the 14th of October. Oh, my notes are all confusing. Okay. In a perfect world, my things were organized with the month, but I'm happy that you get to see the beautiful art, and I will make sure that you get all the information. So now we're at the bottom of the year. It's very exciting. It's very beautiful. I really love this time of the year so, so much. I mean, we're just emerging out of it now as I'm recording this. Um, in early December, we have a Mars square Uranus. This is spicy and potentially could be explosive out in the world. When I say things like that, what I'm really saying is like it's time to pray for peace. When it's not that every super volatile aspect is going to play out that way, but a lot of them do. So when I see them coming, it's like, okay, if you follow my weeklies, you know that I try and cue you for red flag days or weeks. We're in one right now. And the purpose is not to freak you out, but to let you know there's a major disturbance in the force. And you could either be part of the disturbance if you're unconscious and you don't know what's happening. It's really easy to get, pulled into the energy. Or you could kind of grab things and be like, not only am I not going to get taken down by this energy, I'm aware that other people around me might be, and I'm going to help stabilize them or at least be a force for good in a time where the energy is really chaotic. Um, Jupiter is going to do its first retrograde in Leo on December 12th. And then it means that Jupiter will just go back and cover the territory that's already covered. And then Saturn is going to go direct at 7 degrees Aries on December 10th after doing its first retrograde. So that means that, those of you that have Saturn in Aries and are having Saturn returns, 2027 is gonna start at about 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 degrees. That's what we're gonna be covering next year or the next year. And then lastly, Neptune stations direct at 1 degrees Aries on December 12th. So this is going to be a very big year. Let me take this off of stop share so I can just talk to you guys. And we're here for it. I'm here for it. I'm going to be doing, what do? I teach, I do consultations. I have a mentorship group, all of it. If you're interested, just reach out. And I wish you guys a really great year and come talk to me.